Hello, I'm Fergus Fitzgerald. I'm the head brewer here at Adnams, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of our beers in a little bit more detail than normal because you've apparently got lots of time on your hands these days. So the first beer I'm going to talk to you about is Broadside, specifically the bottle Broadside, which is 6.3%. The cask version is 4.7, so obviously a bit lower. The bottle version was the first version that was brewed. This particular beer was first launched in 1972 to celebrate the tricentenary of the Battle of Solebay. Which I know you will all know lots about, but for those in the back who can't remember quite, the Battle of Solebay was one of several wars fought between the Dutch and the English. This particular battle, apparently the sailors were in the pubs in Southwold and had to be dragged off to go and fight the incoming Dutch fleet. The battle ended in a draw, or as far as I'm concerned, it ended in a draw because the Dutch claimed they won and the English claimed they won, which sounds like a draw to me. And then for some reason, 300 years later, Adnams decided this was a good reason to brew a beer. And I'm very glad they did because that beer was Broadside. So Broadside is 6.3. It's brewed with lots of English pale ale malt, a little bit of chocolate malt for a bit of colour and a little bit of that sort of coffee roasted note at the end. We also use English First Gold hops. First Gold hops have a nice orange marmalade flavour to them. They're really used to give the bitterness. There's not too much hop aroma in this beer. The aroma you get from the beer is really from the yeast. So for most of our beers, we use our own house yeast. And we don't talk about yeast very much. And someone told me fermentation is an ugly word. I completely disagree. Fermentation is a beautiful word because it creates so many beautiful things. And it's the yeast that really drives that. And different strains of yeast will produce different flavours. So in this particular beer, we let our yeast ferment much warmer than we normally do. And although our yeast can be quite troublesome to manage, if you play around with the temperatures and give it different things, it can actually be quite a flexible yeast in terms of the flavours it makes. So for this particular beer, by fermenting it warm, we get lots more ester profile. So that ester, what we're talking about, is sort of strawberry jam flavours, a little bit of pear drop, maybe a bit of banana as well. So we don't want too much in there. We don't want to turn into sort of the higher alcohol, too much higher alcohol, but we do want a little bit. So when you smell the beer, you should have a little bit of that strawberry note, a little bit of that banana note maybe. Sometimes it pushes into sort of nail polish, which I quite like when it's just on the verge of being nail polished, but still with lots of fruit character. It's got lots of sweetness as well. So we stop the fermentation much earlier than we stop other beers. So it has lots of residual sweetness to balance the alcohol, but also that sort of that bitterness as well. And we often get questions about why the draft version is different from the from the bottle version, which is purely, I guess, a question of strength really. In the sort of mid '80s, which is when the draft Broadside first came out, there was a demand for more cask beer. Broadside was a particularly popular beer at the time, although it was on wane because people were drinking less bottled beer. And people liked the flavours of Broadside, but obviously at 6.3 they didn't think it would really work as a cask beer. So the lower version, the baby brother of bottled Broadside, was launched in about the mid 80s. But bottled Broadside itself is still 6.3, still really rounded, really rich, and it's one of the beers we really look forward to drinking during its shelf life here. Because actually it ages really well. So you find some beers age really quickly, particularly really hoppy, sort of fresh beers that really deserve to be drunk fresh. But Broadside, because it doesn't rely on the hop character, seems to age much better. So even past its best before date, we often find it sort of really sings. So that's Broadside. Cheers.